Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
So my name is Mario Wynands. I'm the Managing Director of PikPok, based in New Zealand. We're a developer and publisher of mostly digital content, so focused on mobile, tablet, and also do a little bit of desktop, so Steam, Facebook, that sort of thing too. We have a great team of people down there, about 85 or so in total. About 2/3 of that number is production and development, and about 1/3 of that is publishing and support services. We've done a whole bunch of games over the last few years that we're known for under the PikPok brand. Flick Kick Football is one of our more successful titles, released a few years ago. Into the Dead, we do a lot of collaboration with Adult Swim. Just released a game, Monsters at My Metropolis, in conjunction with them today. But actually, 18 and a half years ago, we started a company that was a console development company. We really had no plan. We just wanted to make games, and the way that you did it at the time was just start building stuff and hopefully get a publishing deal with somebody somewhere. We established the game under this brand She, or more specifically She Interactive, because it was the 90s and you tacked interactive onto the end of a game development or web company. And I guess the first lesson here is don't name your company something people can neither pronounce nor spell, because that proved problematic over the years, but we won't linger on that. We started out with a relatively small team. This is actually a photo from about 2000, so a couple of years after we'd started. And I guess, you know, we'd never made games before, but started establishing relationships with an Australian publisher, publishers here in the US, and started doing small contracts, working on niche sports games, working on Barbie titles. Our first Barbie title was Barbie Beach Vacation, which was interesting for a team of about 14 guys and one girl to be working on. And that was a great experience to kind of start learning how to make games, especially games that were kind of smaller licensed products. In some cases, the design documents had already been created for us. So we just had to worry about execution, production, not worry too much about anything other than just getting a game in a box. We started actually thinking about, well, where do we go from here very early on, and the Australasian community was quite fortunate that for one of the Australian game conferences in the early 2000s, we had Ray Mazuka from Bioware come down and talk about their success and how they worked. And the one thing that stood out from his talk for me was he called the asset of their forums and their email list you know, one of the most valuable things that the company had. They had an email list of 1 million people. And he said, every time we do anything, you know, we can contact all those people. And it kind of struck me because Bioware wasn't a publisher, but they were starting to take on kind of this this ability to market themselves and position themselves independently from a publisher. And then when we got the opportunity to work with a smaller Australian studio, Australian publisher, to create a game based on rugby league, they didn't have many resources. They didn't really have a marketing team. They didn't have a QA team. So we took on board the responsibility for free. I offered, you know, we'll create the website, we'll create the community forums, I'll write the PR. You know, we'll do the QA. And that actually started getting us on the road to being able to take control of our brand, to capture consumers and have that dialogue with consumers directly. And that has been so powerful for us over the years that we still get support requests and hate mail about games that publisher makes, even though we've had we haven't made any games for them for years. So that's how strong we were able to connect with those users. In about 2004, 2005, again, we were looking, where do we evolve from here? And one of the companies that was really starting to stand out for me was Marvel, who was struggling in the 90s. They were a comic book company that, in an era where comic books weren't necessarily a very viable or sustainable business. But I was really impressed with what, at the time, they were starting to do with taking control of their IP and becoming more than a comic book company, striving to become an entertainment company. And in a time where we saw the writing on the wall, there was a lot of competition for work-for-hire development work coming into the marketplace. There were more and more products being released every year, and we just saw the market getting more and more competitive. One of the ways that we thought we needed to change and evolve to even survive was to become more than just a developer. We needed to branch out and work out how we could take our IP even wider. So while we did the work-for-hire games, we started pushing forward with doing our own original IP and trying to do that in such a way that we would self-publish, so we would control the IP, we would own it, we wouldn't be giving it up to a publisher, and we would control the messaging, we would control the branding and the marketing. And we'd already had that experience off the back of that rugby league series. So the first game that we self-published onto PSN and XBLA was a game called Grip Shift, which is kind of this crazy Super Monkey Ball meets Mario Kart type thing. It's still available there today, though the royalty checks are getting smaller and smaller every quarter. And then moved on to another game, which again was very successful for us, a game called Shadow, where we took kind of a broken genre of Breakout and kind of reinvigorated that for a modern audience. And we brought that to PSN and Steam. And that's, really started building some momentum for us. Again, we were building our publishing capability, our ability to build out brands. And then this happened, and we saw an opportunity to push forward even faster, because one of the challenges of developing for PSN and XBLA at the time was you had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and many, many months making something and getting something out there. And for a smaller studio like us, that was expensive, it took a long time, and it meant that we could only try sort of one thing at a time, and it would take years and years to get to the point where we actually had a portfolio to speak of. So in 2009, we actually established the PickPok brand as our digital publishing label and started developing games for iPhone. Tried a lot of rapid games, failed miserably on our first game, Fame, which we were licensed from MGM on the reboot off the back of the High School Musical craze, and we thought this was going to be the next big thing. The movie tanked, and the game tanked along with it. But luckily, a few months later, we decided, well, let's make something that plays to our strengths. We can market it to the rugby audience, those forums that we still had, and created Flick Kick Rugby, which we then converted into a separate title, Flick Kick Aussie Rules, which we then converted to Flick Kick Field Goal, and then finally Flick Kick Football, which was really where we started taking off. And that was our first big success on iPhone, and still does very well for us as a franchise today. So that was really, the catalyst. We had this kind of growing incremental shift into publishing before getting onto a platform that really allowed us to take off. And I guess that's part of where I see the change happening in a lot of other developers. There's this shift where you're taking on more and more responsibility over time. You're changing roles within the studio, establishing new tools, new process. And for us, that journey has been from that strict work-for-hire development where, as I said, we had that design document, all we needed to do was worry about putting it in a box, to the point now where we're actually publishing third-party content as well. In terms of what I mean when I say publishing, and I guess this helps give context for the scope of it, the definition I use is this one here, which is publishing is managing the curation, production, marketing, distribution, and monetization of content. And that's a big step up from being a work-for-hire developer, because when you're a work-for-hire developer, you're only really worried about that production word. That's the main thing that you're doing. So there's actually a lot of different things being a publisher outside of that you need to consider. And that's where this little slide comes in, which is purposely complicated, because one of the things when you start mapping out what it is that you do as a publisher and who you deal with is you start seeing the complexity and the number of relationships. When you're a work-for-hire developer, you're worried about serving one customer, the publisher really, and sometimes you're actually making production choices that may compromise the product for the eventual customer because you're serving that one customer and the publisher. But as we've grown beyond that, we've had to consider a much wider range of things, from managing our intellectual property through the development itself, and not only our internal development, but also working with external developers, managing those brand relationships, establishing those brand relationships, worrying about promotion, and then of course the back end, the monetization, customer support, all of those things. There's actually a lot more monetization partners that we have, but I couldn't fit them on the slide, so there you go. So for us, there was a lot that we had to change along the way. Big obvious changes that have changed not only because of our changing role, but also over the years, the way the model has changed in the industry. So we've shifted up from the obvious waterfall model, which is really one of the only viable ways to work as a work-for-hire developer, at least cleanly in terms of a contract, into more of a software as a service model. And part of that is shifting up from that more traditional production methodology into Agile. And our particular flavor of Agile we use is Scrum, which has been very successful for us. One of the big things that we needed to do as we took on more of this publishing responsibility is there were more things to keep track of in terms of that complexity, in terms of the number of things that we needed to do. So we've invested a lot of time and money in improving our task tracking, improving our budgets. Once you're not spending somebody else's money, you're spending your own money, you become really, really good at budgeting, I can tell you that. We've also had to establish whole new teams that really didn't exist before, a marketing team, a community team, customer support, analytics, monetization. And again, some of that has come from the shift in the industry. Analytics didn't really exist anywhere 20 years ago, but is such a necessary part of developing and building out content and making it successful over time. And I would say one of the major changes that we've really had to make is just more communication overall. There are so many interdependencies that we have a lot more channels for communication, both formal and informal, and there's a big emphasis on trying to get clarity in our communication and giving people the opportunity to raise issues, put forward ideas. So there's a lot more, I guess, cross-chatter within the studio than there used to be when we knew one thing that we had to build and we had our heads down. But I think that it's been really important to build that up. And alongside that, to make sure that we had the velocity to make changes is delegating a lot more responsibility as well. You can't be in a place where you have multiple products in the marketplace and you're responsible for every aspect of it, and every decision has to go through a senior manager or myself. It's just not viable over time. So we've had to work out how do we delegate that responsibility, and alongside that, how do we get people to become accountable for that responsibility, as well as giving them the tools to be able to make good decisions. Obviously, changing so many things and adding in all this complexity means that there's a lot of cultural stuff we needed to deal with, and this actually wasn't really something we thought about as we were making the shift. You know, we viewed the shift from work for hire into the publishing space as more of a change in business model, and we didn't really anticipate before that, going down that path, what that meant for the people on the ground in the studio. So there were a lot of things that we've had to deal with along the way, and actually that we're still dealing with to a certain degree. You know, shifting up from console, where we're developing a certain scale and quality of product, to early iPhone games where, you know, flick kick football to some degree is just, you know, flicking a little ball through a goal. You know, that's pretty different from a fully fledged sports game that's 3D and interactive, and people are playing multiplayer sessions over the net. So even though we were kind of building our own product that we owned, and you know, we could do whatever we wanted with that, it was something that we you know, struggled to convince people that we were going down the right path. You know, once we started seeing the consumer feedback coming back, and how many people were downloading our stuff, and how many people were making happy, you know, that really helped shift that. But initially, it was quite a big problem. Also, we had to look at that problem of games as a service. You know, when you're doing work for hire, usually you have a contract, and the project finishes, and then you're done, and you move on to the next thing. The Flick Kick Rugby product team was quite surprised when I turned up on Monday morning after we'd released it the Thursday before, with a list of new changes and features we were going to add. I'm like, no, we're done. What's the next project? So that's been a big shift for us as well. And again, you know, part of it's the dialogue that you have with staff to show them that we can actually keep improving this product and making it better and better. We don't have that kind of one shot to do the best job that we can. We actually have the opportunity over time. Advertising, free to play, obviously, you know, there are some people that have issues with that. Most of those people have actually, who've had a philosophical issue with that, have left the company, and that's just going to happen. You know, it's some things it's not worth trying to change somebody's mind over. Some people we've won over in terms of showing how it can work, showing how it's making the company more sustainable. Some people will just never believe in it, and you just have to let them move on. Again, because we're spending our own money, sometimes we make a lot of decisions which are seen as safe or restrict creative freedom, you know, and it's weird when you have control over it and the ability to kind of do anything you want to do within reason, that you just don't do everything, or certain things that are out there. You know, it's been, again, challenging to kind of make people understand that we're making games for a particular type of audience that we're making an investment, and we need a particular return back in order to keep sustainable. You know, when we're adding in these other groups, you know, marketing, community, social, customer support, you know, there needs to be an evangelization that happens there to make sure that people value those things. You know, if somebody's not building stuff, if they're not building a game, what are they actually adding to the situation? So, you know, over time we've had to educate staff to make them see that answering somebody and giving them good customer support actually benefits the studio really, really well. So in terms of what's happening now and what's coming up next, we're working on a lot of different things to kind of move the business forward from here. Setting up a loyalty rewards program across multiple titles that will allow us to drive people's usage of our games and help get them from one to another and back again. We're working with a new company here, Lutzy. We're also doing taking our advertising expertise to the next level and doing brand integrations and sponsorships into various products. So our games are able to be reskinned, and we can bring in different brands, different sponsors into our products in a meaningful way and create new revenue streams that don't necessarily cannibalize on other things that we're doing. And that's a pretty exciting business for us as we start seeing more and more advertising dollars coming into the gaming space from major consumer brands. And one of the things I think that where the company is kind of coming full circle is having this concept of more fluid content where we're starting to transcend the different platforms. And I think it's very easy, when we start talking about consumers, to talk about mobile consumers or PC gamers or console gamers, whereas the reality is, these people are multiple things, and it really depends on the context of where they are, what devices they have access to at that point in time, and over time, that helps, define them. Gamers are more complex and broad than I think we talk about them a lot of times. And that means that from a content perspective, we also want to think about not only developing content for a particular platform, but also how that content can scale over time to be played in a way that allows people to game on their own terms, on their device of choice, wherever they are, so they can consume our games as much as they want. So there's a few things that we've done that are helping us achieve that. We've created our own proprietary platform, PickPop Plus, which helps us kind of connect people across games and allows us to drive a number of different services, managing their profiles, providing customer support, so that there are ways we can support customers directly within the app. And also the content that we're building now, and we announced this game, Breakneck, a couple of days ago, where you can see that there's these are actually screenshots from the mobile version, but you can imagine how this might scale to other platforms over time as well. And then, of course, downstream, taking our other franchises forward. So we're working on a sequel for our Into the Dead game, as well as pushing into new genres as well. So that's kind of the broad picture of where we've been and what we're doing. To summarize, publishing is pretty complicated in general, so for us at least, and what I'd recommend is if you're moving into that space, to do that incrementally over time. Don't try to necessarily do it all at once. Pick your battles. Understand that there are going to be cultural issues as you change your studio, and be proactive in managing that. And establish what you're trying to work towards, who you want to be, what type of content you want to build, and who you're developing and publishing to, and work towards that. So that's me. So I think we have like 3 minutes for questions, maybe?
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, so we have time for a few questions. Happy to see a few hands up already.
What challenges did you run into during the transitional phase when you were still working on work-for-hire jobs, but you were also building Shatter and GripShift, in terms of building the studio and client perceptions of you potentially using profits from what they're doing to reinvest your, I don't know, stronger team members into your original stuff? What kind of stuff did you run into?
Yeah, I think that wasn't usually a problem. I think the issue was more internal. As New Zealanders, we're kind of unfortunately super honest. We're like the second least corrupt country in the world, according to certain indexes. And so actually, we kind of took on that burden ourselves, and where work-for-hire jobs that we were doing were running into trouble or needed extra resource, we actually stole from our own projects and delayed things out for us. So we were kind of our own worst enemy there. We could have been more aggressive and robbed Peter to pay Paul in the other direction, but we didn't do that. But because we made that choice, it did take longer to get where we wanted to be. When you're developing so many different work-for-hire games, there's always something more important than the game that doesn't have a publisher hounding you and hitting that particular release date. Now we're the publisher. The challenge is how do we manage our internal stuff, our internal projects, how do we prioritize that, and how do we make sure we stay on time without compromising quality as well. So, but yeah, we were our own worst enemy, and we slowed ourselves down.
Anyone? Yep, behind you, you have a microphone.
Hi. So you mentioned that culturally it was a challenge to get people on board with safe games and like restricted content. So that's definitely something I've experienced. Like especially with new people entering the company, they always want to do something indie or novel, something that nobody's ever seen. So how do you get them on board with, going with something that has a better chance of making money?
I think we try to find a balance where we can, and we try to give people outlets to, scratch that creative and more kind of out there itch. That's one of the reasons why we've been working with Adult Swim, because the stuff we collaborate on with them is just crazy. The game we released today, Monsters at Metropolis, is mental. And we wouldn't choose to make that game on our own because it's just so out there. So it's opportunities like that. We have a lab day the first Wednesday of every month, where people can kind of do whatever they want. That gives them the ability to experiment, create prototypes that they may want to put forward. We made a game, published a game earlier in the year called 4 Letters, which a programmer designed and prototyped in less than a day, and brought that to myself, and instantly saw, here's something fun that we would never have put a team on that to say, go and make a word puzzle game. But he had that foresight and that interest in creating that, and from that prototype we were like, yes, we can get behind this. We also have a game jam every year for about a week in December typically, which allows people to kind of work together to do different prototypes, and sometimes there's stuff that gets moved forward out of that. But yeah, it's challenging. It's something we still struggle with. We try to find as much of a balance as we can between doing things that are interesting to people and kind of a little bit more out there. So that last slide that I showed there, this is something that's gaining popularity within the team now. It's a bit more what people want to do than some of the sports stuff that we've been doing, for example. So yeah, just trying to find a balance and make people understand that we're not making games for ourselves. We're trying to find an audience and make games for them, and that making other people happy helps make people happy within their roles.
All right. One quick question. Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned Marvel and Bioware as sources of inspiration. Are there any other companies that you kind of look up to, either gaming or other verticals?
That's putting me on the spot. I mean, there are a lot of great companies out there that, and individuals that we're fortunate enough to work with. I can't think of anyone offhand that I want to name, but yeah, I think there's a lot of friends we have within the industry that are very encouraging in terms of what they do. Chris back there is, that I met years back in Singapore. It's similar sort of story. He's getting towards that path yourself and doing the hard yards. We really respect people who put in the hard work. It's a lot harder to respect somebody who's kind of lucked into it, I guess. But yeah, there's people out there trying to make it work and being honest about it, and being true to the consumer, as well as taking commercial success into account. They're not out there exploiting anybody. So I don't have anyone else in particular I can name, but certainly looking back and citing Marvel as an example, and that was an example I raised within the studio multiple times year to year, and look at where they are now. I mean, it's incredible what they've built and how they've brought their IP back, the verticals they've built, the quality of what they do, and just how it continues to snowball. It's amazing.
Right, I think we'll have to wrap it up. Thank you so much.